Hello and welcome to Season 1 of Riddlers, a podcast by Reflexive Lenses. I'm Pratibha, and with Reflexive Lenses Consulting, I'm on a quest to meet some truly intriguing riddlers, organizational leaders, HR consultants, and coaches who explore the complexity of human drama within systems. Each conversation is guided by the Existential Universe Mapper or EUM framework, a bifocal lens that looks at both the individual and the organization. In today's episode, we delve into the relationship between power dynamics and organizational development practices with our first riddler, Ashok Malhotra. Ashok is a student of human drama. With over 35 years as a process consultant, he's worked with top management teams across more than 60 organizations, corporate, public, and social. An author, teacher, researcher, and playful philosopher, Ashok is also the mind behind the EOM framework. We love that we are starting this season with you, Ashok. Welcome to Riddlers.
Thank you.
So, Ashok, when we sat back and thought through dozens of directions for our opening conversation, the discussion between power inequities and OD practices stood out. It seemed to call out to you. Why is that?
Well, because that's the biggest challenge that I have faced in my engagement with systems. As an OD practitioner, the endeavor is to help the organization enhance its effectiveness and efficiency, as also deal with the processes which the human community, which an organization also deals with, and particularly with those processes which dehumanize. And I believe nothing dehumanizes more than power inequity, whether it be in society at large, whether it be in families, whether it be in work organizations. Power inequity is perhaps the single largest source of dehumanization. The exploitation of the powerful by the powerful of the powerless, the meek submission of the powerless, and these are very obvious. But I think what is very, very striking is how it impacts the way people think. It's almost as though the entire way of thinking is governed by the prevalent power dynamics and power structure. So to that extent, even one would think that people who are in powerless positions would work towards enhancing their power or correcting it. But that's not always the case. Many times, actually, they actively collude with keeping the same power structure in place. The most striking example of course, of this is that when you are working with the dysfunctionalities of a patriarchal system, the resistance is not just from men, it is equally from women. Because everyone has been conditioned to think in a particular way. And this way of thinking is so deeply rooted in the way the power is defined, distributed in an organization. So consequently, dealing with power and the dynamics which it creates is extremely challenging. And perhaps I would say the most important thing for any OD practitioner. Answers your question?
It really does. Though it makes me wonder, do you see existing OD practices addressing this or engaging with this? And if so, how do you see that happening?
Well, the answer to that is yes and no. Let's first look at power. Power has two clear dimensions. Power on one hand is a zero-sum game. We call it the distributive dimension of power. which essentially means that one person becomes powerful at the cost of the other. So you know, it's kind of zero sum. It's a kind of, in popular parlance, you'd call it a win-lose equation. It's also true that many times you enhance your own power by making the other person more powerful. So one person's power contributes to the power of the other person. In that sense, it's not a zero-sum game. This is the integrative dimension of the power dynamics. Now, OD practices, the existing practices, are very effective in dealing with the integrative dimension of the power dynamics. They even perhaps can help in seeing what was being seen as a zero-sum game into a non-zero-sum game, into making a distributive power thing into an integrative thing. So to that extent, they make a significant contribution and they're very effective. However, that's neither feasible all the time, nor is it, necessarily desirable. Power is zero sum also. There is a distributive dimension to power equation. And in that, the existing practices obviously have their inherent limitations. The biggest being that the gatekeepers of all OD interventions are people who are in positions of power. So it's the power structure which decides what OD interventions are permissible and what kind of OD can be practiced. So therefore, there is an inherent limitation in that. Nonetheless, not all. There's certain kind of OD which does not directly engage with the aspect of humanizing the organization to that extent, who are primarily concerned with the issues of efficiency and effectiveness. They would not engage with this question at all, and they would very happily collude with the powers that be. So if we focus only on the kind of OD which also endeavors to humanize the organization, then they all try and do it in their own way. And there are different types of OD interventions, kinds of OD practices. I don't want to go into elaborating all of them. But if I just single out two or three, right? One is a stream of OD which recognizes the power inequity, but engages with it in a very normative way, which says, it should not be so. People who are in positions of power should not exploit, and people who are in positions of not so much in power should not meekly surrender or whatever.
Sure.
So they have advices to give. I call this sermonico. It's more like a sermon. You kind of say.
Did you say sermonic?
Sermonic, yeah. It's like a sermon.
Right.
It's like a sermon, which is good to hear. So there's the kind of OD which would emphasize on things like values. These are our values. This is our mission. This is the larger picture. They would focus on trust building, collaboration, team work, and stuff. They have a lot of gyan to give, and depends on the extent to which it is taken. So some of it may work, some of it people may shrug off, and they say, okay, it was good to, talk of all this, but it actually doesn't really make a difference because it does not address the basic issues of power distribution. Directly or indirectly, sermonic OD has to collude with powers that be. It can only deliver sermons which are acceptable to them. So that's one kind of OD. There's another kind of OD, which is what I call agentic OD. Now, in agentic OD, the emphasis shifts from the prevailing structure and inequities in the structure and it places the emphasis more on the individual. So the idea is that if individuals, particularly those who feel powerless, if they can enhance their own agency and they can learn to empower themselves, perhaps some of it can be, dealt with. Now, some of the typical examples of this would be through things like sensitivity training, group relations conferences, and stuff like that, where the primary emphasis is on the individual. And you hope that through working with the individual, a certain degree of self-authorization takes place, and the power structure to some extent is reconfigured. Again, to some extent it helps, but since this basic structure remains in place, the extent to which it may make some difference to the individual, but how much difference it makes to the system at large, I'm not so sure. The third kind of OD, which many people will perhaps not even call OD, is what I call revolutionary OD. In revolutionary OD, you actually look at ways in which you can mobilize the collective into doing something which would make an impact on the prevailing power structure. Now, you would find that not in the corporate sector, you would find this more in the social sector, and in their kind of work, you would find it a little more. In corporate sectors, the only thing of examples of revolutionary OD, and I said, many people will not consider it as OD, was trade union. Like trade union is also actually, it's in many ways, is working towards changing the organization.
Sure.
And it's doing through mobilizing, through collective action of masses. But people would not consider it, and in any case, that's also declining. So revolutionary OD is more, in a sense, theoretical in the context of prevalent OD practices than. So that's the way it is. To some extent, they engage with it to extent. But as I said, the primary limitation, which you cannot run away from, is that the gatekeeper of OD are the people who are in position.
It all seems very bleak to me. Seems seems like there should be an alternative to work around some of the limitations of this, right? Do you see an alternative approach then?
Please tell me when you find one. In my practice, I can't say that I found a different way which can engage with it meaningfully. However, there are certain things which I think help. One of the things which I think is particularly necessary to have a different kind of an approach to OD is to shift the focus from what I call problem centricity to phenomena centricity.
Oh.
Phenomena centricity. Right. See, a problem is a problem because someone sees it as a problem. Every phenomena which you find is uncomfortable, you would call it a problem.
Right.
Now, the same phenomena may seem to you as a problem, but may not seem to someone else as a problem. Right? High absenteeism, for instance, may be a great problem for the management, but may not necessarily, is not seen as a problem by the workmen. So therefore, what you regard as a problem, and often, when in all OD interventions, the starting point is what is the problem statement. Now, this, of course, is partly a carryover from a very misguided notion that the primary thing of management is to solve problems, which I think is crap. But I'm not going to go into that for the moment. So this business of what is,
I'm going to hold you to it, though. We'll come back to it, but yes, please continue.
so the image, the first thing which invariably people would come to, whether they are it's external body consultant or otherwise, what's the problem? What's the problem state? So it becomes the defining, it defines the OD journey. Now, so long as if you start with accepting the problem statement as a starting point, you have already colluded with powers that we, because it's a problem as they see it. Now, unfortunately, I haven't found a way to directly deal with it. So I would collude with it and I say, okay, let's see what the problem statement is. And I would not say, let's not worry about problems and they'll show me the door immediately. So I would go along with that, but would then gradually shift the focus from problem centricity to phenomena centricity. Let me give you an example. One of the most common problem statements that I hear from CEOs and whoever invites you for the OD intervention is lack of collaboration and silo function. You're smiling.
Makes sense.
I'm sure you have also heard it many times.
Absolutely.
So you have to collude with it and you say, okay, that is the problem. But I'm not going to collude with that to the extent to go ahead and try and solve this problem. I would gradually shift their lens from looking at it as a problem to seeing it as a phenomenon. And I would say, let's say, what purpose is this phenomena serving? Every phenomena in any system or an individual serves a purpose. And every phenomena comes with a certain price. So once you say that, you don't put it as good, bad, ugly, or nice, or right, or wrong. You say, okay, this is a phenomenon. The phenomena is that people are working in silos, right? And not engaging. Let's see what purpose is this phenomena serving. Now, once you start looking at it, you see it's serving several purposes. It is serving the purpose of making people feel safe. That I'm in my territory, this is my thing, so you feel safe. It's serving the purpose of a fairly harmonious interface. It may be superficial, but your interface management, I don't interfere in your stuff, you don't interfere in. So it's serving the purpose of a certain peaceful existence. It is also serving the purpose of, in a sense, the blocking challenge to the authority of the CEO. Right? Because so long as in these situations, the CEO would primarily be working on a one-on-one basis. जिसका issue है उसके साथ करो. He'll also be there, or she'll be the ultimate arbiter, right? So this is now very subtle. Also, the insidious processes of divide and rule will also get, played out. Now, once you see that this phenomena is certain purposes, it's also costing. Then you take an informed decision as to what do we wish to do with this phenomenon. Okay? Are there other ways in which some of the purposes which it is serving that can be met? Are there other ways, for instance, in which people can feel safe? Are there other ways in which certain kind of, harmony be maintained. So there are other ways in which some of these things can be done. Because if you do not look at that, and then you also are prepared that, okay, if we wish to shift from this, change this phenomena, then there'll be a price which will have to be paid. Are we willing to pay that price? Then you don't see it as this is a problem which is to be solved. Because when you remain in the problem set of all you can say is, okay, people should collaborate, people should trust each other, people should be nice to each, not necessarily nice, but they should, offer their views, and they should not, one of the most absurd things which I hear people say in organizations is don't take it personally. I mean, what the hell you're saying? I mean, we are all professionals here. You don't leave your feelings outside. Your feelings are at play in work.
Absolutely, makes sense.
And so once you shift the focus from a certain problem centricity to a certain phenomena centricity, I do not say that this, opens up, can address the issue of power inequity altogether, but it at least blocks a very important source of collusion. Because the biggest collusion which takes place between the powers that be and OD consultants is by accepting the problem statements as it is given. And by saying, yeah, this is the problem statement, you have colluded.
I'm wondering, what is the kind of reception you find to the phenomena-centric approach? And I'm sure that because you also recognize this, it must be manifesting in your work also. So what has been your experience with it when working with clients?
I don't use that term. I'm using
Sure.
that.
Sure.
Saying that I have.
Sure. But it requires a different kind of engagement, right? It wouldn't be as transactional at the face of it also.
You see,
So I'm
also
wondering.
it kind of takes, you have to start the relationship from where to begin with the client is. Right? And you go along to a point, and only when it certain kind of thing happens, and if that, shift doesn't take place, the engagement doesn't go any further. It also doesn't go that. But gradually, when people start seeing, as also if you see, for instance, if you see in the Hume framework, in Hume framework, we don't talk of strengths and weaknesses. We don't talk of positives and negatives. We don't talk of this is nice and this is not nice. We look at whether it is the individual or it is the organization.
Before you get to the Hume framework, I think we've not spoken, and our audiences wouldn't really know. Many of them wouldn't know at least about the Hume framework. Since you've gone that route, it'll be great if very briefly you could, talk about the framework itself and how it speaks to the phenomena centricity when doing OD work.
All right, the origin of the Hume framework is with my sort of discomfort with some of the existing ways of looking at individuals and organizations. And there were two main sources of it. One, which I found that most of the existing frameworks tend to categorize and put individuals or organizations into boxes and say, this is what it is, this is what it is. So either you are in a box or you classify them along certain traits. In case of individuals, on the introversion, extroversion scale, you are this much. So it's almost as though so it's either a type approach or a trait approach. And I'm unhappy with that. The second, they have an inherent prejudice or inherent orientation to look at things as positive and negative. So looking at something which does not classify and certainly does not put them into normative categories of desirable, undesirable, strengths, weaknesses, and this I will challenge anyone. Because many organizations do performance appraisal. in their performance appraisal, they would say strengths of this person and areas that this person needs to work on. Go and look at it, and you will see that they are invariably two sides of the same coin. So one of the strengths will say very assertive and outspoken, areas which needs to become more tactful and listen, or something like that. So what you would say, the strengths, so these, because this is what, that if you, when you look at it as a phenomena, you will say every phenomena has both sides. Right? It will have a positive side, it will have, a not so positive side, or some, I don't like the word positive, or something which you makes you uncomfortable. That's true of every film. So in this sense, my search was to have a way in which the multiplicity and fluidity and uniqueness of a living system can be understood, engaged with, rather than it being put in categories. And certainly not, because that to me makes absolutely no sense of saying this is your strength and this is your weakness. So that's how I started. So we have a framework, we have instruments which map individuals and organizations. And if you look at the output of which they show up, they will never use this kind of language. They will say, this is where the phenomena, this is the phenomena. Like in the, you have multiple universes, and we never say that these universes, any one universe is superior to another. One of the main, often I've heard people feel puzzled when I say that Hume is an evolutionary framework, but it is not normative. Because people believe that if it is evolutionary, it must be normative, because you're assuming that evolution is a good thing. I'm not saying it's good, or I'm not saying it's bad. It just is. Many times when people use the word self-work, I get this image that self is some kind of an object.
Or project, for that matter.
Or this object has to be so ठोक ठाक के ठीक करने का. Well, that's part of it. Is you live in a world which is where everything is like in a marketplace. For those who understand a little bit of Hindi, and they may have heard this song, "Hum hai matae kuchao bazaar ki tarah." We are in some ways becoming like products in a marketplace.
क्या बात है?
See, one of the very significant element in any organizational transformation or personal transformation for that matter is the unintended consequences. Intended consequences तो ठीक है, लेकिन हर चीज के unintended consequences होते हैं. How do so we are not, I know organizational transformation is a big word today. I think preservation is as important as transformation is. You just don't keep transforming all the time. You need to both preserve, and it's a tightrope rope. You have to kind of keep both these elements together.
In the spirit of keeping both these elements together, I want to bring back the part where you said OD professionals or managers are treated as problem solvers. Though I'm wondering if people you work with not find your approach a little bit too philosophical. Do you think managers are philosophers?
Well, they should be. They don't like to think of themselves as philosophers, and I've heard that term many times thrown at me, that managers are not philosophers. But I think people who take significant decisions about so many lives, and today, if you see, a large part of the human context is being shaped by corporates. You go to any airport, you see a lot of language is corporate language. Even other places, even in small remote places, the corporate language has seeped fall through. The way the corporates today are influencing the human context is not funny. And I hope some of the human context starts impacting the corporates as well. So if that's the kind of influence and power they have, and then they better be philosophers. They better start thinking about what do we think as real and what do we think as unreal. How do we distinguish between truth and false? What are the kind of, ethics that we wish to follow? What is our, whether it's any branch of philosophy for that matter. I would personally think that it's a basic grounding in philosophy is an absolute must for everyone, but certainly for people who are in positions of such power and influence.
So, in the light of this context, all the conversation that we've had today, what gives you hope, especially in this domain?
If I look at the limited question of power inequities, what gives me hope is a certain trend. And let me elaborate on what that trend is. You see, 40, 50 years back, the primary determinants of organizational success were tangible factors. Whether you had the right money, whether you had enough money, resources, technology, and hopefully good government connections and stuff like that. If you had all that, success was more or less granted. Now, if you look at how things have changed, more and more, it is the human ingenuity which is going to determine whether you are your success. It's the more intangible factors. Now, the moment that happens, in many ways, the relative power of the individual vis-a-vis the organization begins to shift. And if you see over the last 2, 3 decades, 4 decades, it's earlier the balance of power was heavily shifted towards the side of the organization. Today, also it is still tilted towards the side of the organization, but the balance has been a little bit corrected. And I see this balance correcting itself further as time. And the more empowered the individuals feel, the more they will begin to own up their work. They will not remain employment-centered. Their concern will not be so much with being employed. They will not see themselves as employees. The quality of their relationship with the organization is changing and will change even further. It has other consequences with it. I'm not going into that, which we also need to be watchful about. And this shift will make the biggest dent in the power inequity that we are talking about than any kind of ODF.
Well, on that hopeful note, thank you for that thought-provoking conversation, Ashok. I'm walking away with many reflections, and I'm sure our listeners are too.
Thank you.
You've been listening to stalwart process consultant and relentless inquirer Ashok Malhotra on Season 1 of Riddlers, a podcast by Reflexive Lenses. If this conversation resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Write to us at pratibha@eumlens.in and share what it stirred in you.